Okay, so now we'll consider some reasons to think why it might be or might not be rational to believe in God. We already talked a bit about the idea of evidence and with the hiddenness argument. So the question is, do we need the same kind of evidence for God's existence as we do for the existence of other things, such as tigers or cats or couches or whatever we believe? If we're trying to decide whether we believe in tigers, we would want to perceive tigers, and that would count as evidence for us usually to be justified in believing their existence. But of course, with God, since God is non-physical being, can't be perceived, it seems difficult to apply the same standards of knowledge to beliefs in God as we might use in our ordinary kinds of knowledge. And we can go back to thinking about first chapter of this book where we talked about epistemology and justification and what it means to have knowledge of something. So you might recall that Descartes thinks that we have this sort of clear and distinct idea or innate idea of God. So for Descartes, we don't need the same kind of evidence to believe in God that we do to believe in tigers or anything perceptual. But we also don't need that kind of evidence for basic mathematical or logical truths. We come about those beliefs in a different sort of way through reasoning. And again, as Descartes argues from this idea of clear and distinct ideas. So Descartes argues that our idea of God must have come from God, because an idea must have a cause. This is the principle of sufficient reason, again, remember, where everything has to have a cause. The cause of the idea of God, he says, couldn't be anything except God, because as imperfect beings, we couldn't have invented the idea of a perfect being on our own, according to Descartes. Not everybody accepts this argument, obviously, but this is what Descartes says. Alvin Plantinga gives a different argument for why we should believe in God. He says, look, we're setting the standards for belief in God too high. He says, we all believe that other people have minds, and our evidence for this belief is not actually all that strong, because we can't access other people's minds. We can only access our own mind. So we're making an analogical argument by saying, look, I believe that I have a mind. I can tell that I have a mind, and I'm a person, and there are other people in the world who act like me and seem to also have this, they seem to have the same behaviors. So I will assume by this analogy that if I have a mind, they probably do too. And Plantinga says this is perfectly reasonable, even though it's not a very good analogical argument, because, for example, if we wanted to know whether we should believe that all tigers are white or all tigers are orange or that all alligators are green or whatever, we would want to see all of the alligators or see all of the tigers if possible, because just one not being green or orange would be evidence against this far-reaching claim. So we only have access to one mind, though, as we said, and so really this isn't enough then by this kind of analogical argument to prove that everybody has minds. But few of us deny this claim, Plantinga says, and it's reasonable. So he says, look, we should believe in God just as much as we should believe in stuff in the world. The evidence for it is not that much worse. So Plantinga says that we accept a lot of beliefs without question that we don't have a lot of evidence for. And he also argues that, like we can perceive an alligator, he says we have a sense called the sensus divinatus, that is the sense that allows us to know God, and that it's kind of like perception, and that it should be trusted just as much as perception. He says that using it to justify our beliefs about the divine is just as warranted as using perceptual experience to justify our beliefs about stuff in the world. So remember, justified true belief is supposed to be knowledge in a lot of cases, according to philosophers and epistemologists. So as we saw, there's a lot of problems with that. But Plantinga calls the property that allows us to turn belief into knowledge warrant. And he argues that to have warrant, a belief must have been produced by a properly functioning cognitive facility. This would be designed by God to produce true belief, and that facility must be operating under favorable circumstances. It seems sort of reasonable as a definition of knowledge, right? And he says that they're not really under our control, so his account of epistemic warrant is external. So if the sensus divinatus is working properly, it's under favorable conditions, then our beliefs about God are warranted according to Plantinga. Of course, a lot of people have argued against this, but we won't go into all of that right now. William Austin makes a similar argument, and he argues that what he calls the Christian mystical practice of forming beliefs about God and God's activities are just as justified as our perceptual practice, which is what he calls our normal way of forming beliefs based on our perceptual experiences. So we see a tiger, we believe there's a tiger there. He thinks that's just as we have just as much evidence and we have just as much knowledge in that as we do on using our Christian mystical practice, which is kind of his version of Plantinga's perceptual sensus divinatus. And if we demand an independent reason outside of our belief in God to justify a Christian mystical practice, then it's double standard, because Austin says, we don't demand a non-circular way to justify our normal perceptual practice, our normal way of looking at stuff and concluding that it's there. So I don't know if this is a good argument or not. Probably a lot of people think not, because I think that we usually think that something like the Christian mystical practice is relevantly different from our normal perceptual practice, but this is Austin's view.